Hello there, and welcome to this presentation on eating well with fatigue. This presentation has been produced by the Bedfordshire Community Health Service, ME/CFS, and Post-COVID Service. My name is Jenny Betts. I'm a physiotherapist working in the fatigue services, and we've produced this information for both services to help people to eat well, even though they have fatigue. This first session in the series is setting up the very complex topic of diet and nutrition. The reality, unfortunately, is that we don't fully understand all the effects that food has even on a healthy body and mind. So we can't make clear and definitive statements about how food will affect anybody with chronic fatigue. And we can't give any definitive answers on any food that will cure chronic fatigue. However, we do know that the fuel we give our bodies is a key pillar of health for everybody. So it's really important to address. Eating well can provide your body with essential building blocks for growth and nutrients. And it's important for everyone in the prevention of illnesses such as heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. There are additional risks for people with severe fatigue of things like malnutrition and obesity, which need to be addressed. And we know that poor eating can also worsen symptoms of fatigue. We have used guidance from the British Dietetics Association on ME and CFS to create this information. And we hope to provide you with a slightly easier to understand overview of how you can eat well despite having fatigue. So let's think first about what eating well might mean. There's some different thoughts on here, and you may well have your own thoughts as well about what eating well would mean for you. There's lots of different specific diets, which some of which are on the screen there, which have their own marketing and claims, and we'll look at those in a little bit more detail later on. Often, however, their advice is quite contradictory. And there's lots of pressure from people to sell certain products or to do things in a very specific way. All the information and advice that's out there on the internet and that people might be telling you, it can often be quite overwhelming and make it very difficult to know where to make a start. And with fatigue particularly, sometimes you can feel that there's no way that you're going to be able to do those things. So let's think about what we would like from a good diet. It may not align with what other people want from their diet. You know, your idea of a good diet might be different from a bodybuilder's or from a child's or from somebody who is vegan. But let's think about what is important to you when you're thinking about having a good diet. We know as well that the diet hasn't been shown to cure or fix fatigue, but it can help with some symptoms, and it can also help you to support other lifestyle changes that do help your fatigue. Energy might be something that's really important to people watching this video particularly. And that's not just having more energy, but having more sustainable and more predictable levels of energy. We also want to think about a diet that's sustainable, something that you can keep up for a long time, not just stick to for a couple of weeks and then let it slip. We want a diet to be enjoyable, so something that includes foods you enjoy rather than feeling like, it's medicine every time you eat a meal. We want to kind of make sure that you're covering essential nutrients in your diet and make sure that you're getting the things that your body needs to be well. We would like it if you can feel satisfied. So that might mean different things to different people, but feeling like you are able to eat the things that you want to eat. And generally, people would like to aim for a stable weight, so not enormous gains in weight and not enormous losses in weight. And that might be different for everyone. But in general, we want to focus with these things on the quality of the food that you're eating, not necessarily how many calories there are in it or how many health claims it has. So this is where we have a little look at some of the more specialist diets. The reason why we're drawing a bit of attention to these is that they often claim that they cure fatigue or help with fatigue, and we want to have a look at the pros and cons of that and what evidence there is behind it. So looking at the keto diet first, it does have medical research in it, but that is mainly in managing epilepsy and reducing seizures. It's also been widely advertised, and there's variations of it, including the Atkins diet and the carnivore diet, which all advocate very low carbohydrate intake. When we look at what we want from our diet, we can see that this diet is actually quite hard to sustain. It does have increased risks of reduced energy and dehydration, and it can risk an increase in unhealthy saturated fats, and it also reduces the variety in diet, so takes away some of those micronutrients that are really important. There are people who find that lowering their carbohydrates does help them with the energy levels, but this doesn't mean keeping them to extremely low levels as advocated in some of these diets. Low histamine diets is something that's been a bit more commonly referred to recently, and it's associated particularly with long COVID. There have been some studies investigating the impact of antihistamine medications to reduce symptoms of long COVID, but at the moment these are quite inconclusive. There isn't any solid evidence that reducing histamine in the diet can help with long COVID symptoms. The true low histamine diet restricts food groups greatly, and is really only intended for short periods for a couple of weeks, followed by reintroduction of normal food groups. If you do undergo this diet, and if it is recommended to you medically, then it should be supervised medically or by a trained dietitian, and not undertaken without support. It's also really important to remember that there's lots of potential sources of histamine triggers in the world, not just food. So sticking to a low histamine diet, even if it did help, may be kind of undermined somewhat if you have a reaction to things like scents or pollution or chemicals in your environment. Additionally, medication that you might be taking, hormones in your own body, and things like exercise can also increase histamine in the body. So there's lots and lots of different sources of histamine, and being on a very restrictive diet may not produce the results that you want, and can be enormously difficult to stick to. The anti-inflammatory diet can sometimes be confused with a low histamine diet. We do know that there are lots and lots of different causes that might be possibly causing the fatigue that is persistent in these conditions. But anti-inflammatory food is really being promoted as a cure for lots of different illnesses, including chronic fatigue, neurological conditions, and autoimmune conditions. Inflammation of the body can disrupt the working of the joints and the immune system and can trigger stomach pains. The anti-inflammatory diet is much less restrictive than a low histamine diet, and it is therefore easier to stick to and less risky. The diet is quite strongly associated with what's called superfoods, but we know that one food is not going to fix all the problems that are associated with long COVID or chronic fatigue syndrome, and it's unlikely to make a big difference to your overall health. Bear in mind as well, like the low histamine diet, that there's lots of other things that might influence how well your body copes with inflammation, such as your activity level, your sleep, your ability to rest, and your ability to deal with stress. So an anti-inflammatory diet is not going to manage all of those things. We've done a bit of a grouping here for the other things, which is under restrictive diets. So what we mean by this is cutting a food group or a component of food out of your diet completely. So that might be gluten or meat or dairy or sugar. This can be really helpful if you have other health conditions or other beliefs that mean you don't want to eat meat, or you don't want to eat animal products, or you cannot eat gluten or dairy. But for people who don't have that, who don't have objectively measurable allergies, so, which is a reproducible, reliable effect which happens every single time you eat the food within an hour after eating the food, then it is not likely that you have a kind of damaging reaction to that food in the same way that you would if you had something like celiac disease or lactose intolerance. If you do cut out an entire food group, it's worth bearing in mind that you may have to adapt the rest of your diet to make up for nutrition that you would normally get through those things, like calcium if you cut out dairy. And that might make it more difficult to stick to a nutritionally balanced diet and can make it more energy consuming and time consuming. It may be helpful if there are things that often make you feel unwell to reduce your consumption of those things for a time, but it doesn't mean you have to cut them out completely. It's also worth bearing in mind that if you have symptoms in your stomach or something, sometimes after eating a type of food and then sometimes you don't, it may be worth looking around the food as well at things that are kind of coexisting with that food. So it may be worth looking at, are you eating that food late at night and it tends to give you the reaction when your body is more fatigued? Or do you sometimes react to it when you eat in a restaurant but not at home? Or do you react worse when you're eating in a busy environment that's noisy and it might be putting more stress on your body? Or is your digestion generally a bit slower? Maybe because of hormones, maybe because of you're not being very active, and that might be increasing things like bloating or stomach cramps. So as well as considering the food that you're eating as a trigger, it might also be worth having a look at what's happening around when you're eating that food to see if you can kind of identify a different trigger as well. We do need to, as I've said all the way through this, think about the impact that these diets might have on you and your general energy, especially if you're trying to do things like pacing, you're trying to kind of reduce the effort that is involved in doing things like cooking and looking after yourself, whether there's going to be an enormous benefit from trying a more complex diet, or if that's going to actually add difficulty to your routine. The diet that's actually advised for ME and for long COVID by the British Dietetics Association and the ME Association is the Mediterranean diet, which I've put a picture of there for you. So both this diet and the sort of NHS Eat Well guide recommend that you eat the main amount of your calories and your energy from whole grains instead of processed carbohydrates. So that does include things like bread and pasta, but also things like potatoes and unprocessed cereals like porridge and things like that. And also they both advocate a wide variety and a large amount of your food comes from plant products. So that can include fruit and vegetables and pulses and legumes. And having a wide variety of those is going to help you to have lots of nutrients, lots of fiber, and also lots of water in your food. Smaller proportions of the diet would be made up of lean proteins such as fish, dairy, eggs, or fortified dairy alternatives or vegan alternatives if that's part of your diet. And we should be limiting the red meats, processed meats, overly processed foods, and extremely salty and fatty and sugary things. Those are making up the very small part of the diet. So we can see that this is in line with some of the more moderate principles of the specialist diets we looked at before, and kind of bringing that together into something that has less risks associated with malnutrition or reducing diet, and it's more easily sustained. It fits more easily into a normal lifestyle. Having less processed foods and more fresh foods is naturally a lower inflammatory diet. And if you're avoiding foods which have high simple sugar content and high saturated fats, that also reduces a lot of the inflammatory food groups. Although the diets aren't low carb, like some of the diets we looked at earlier, they do promote whole grain carbohydrates, which are a more filling source of energy and a more stable source of energy, alongside having vital fiber content and micronutrients. It's worth remembering that most of us aren't trained dietitians, and most of us don't have free access to allergy testing and nutritional testing. But actually, the evidence indicates that that's not necessary for people managing fatigue conditions, as long as you don't have other diagnoses requiring specialist dietitian input. When we feel like we have to understand all of the nutrition in different foods, it can be overwhelming and quite confusing. But these diets focus on simple concepts such as eating more whole foods, which makes it less likely for you to eat lots of sugary and processed foods, and much more likely that you're going to eat a variety of nutritional foods and lots of things that bring you all those micronutrients and fiber and healthy options in. As I said at the beginning, the reality is that there's no one diet that's shown to change the course of fatigue on its own. But what we want to do is add diet in as part of all the other changes that you're making. The other factor just to think about, which we've touched on a little bit, is how we eat. So it's not only about what we eat, but also about when we eat and how we feel about eating. So these factors can change how effectively your body is using the nutrition from food and how your body copes with the meals. So having regular meal times is important because it helps you to regulate that sleep-wake cycle. It helps your body to predict what's going to happen more easily and prepare itself for managing a meal. So prepare your digestive system for coping with a meal and digesting it. It also supports your natural hunger and fullness signals. So you may be able to reduce kind of cravings or reduce overeating or undereating by supporting that natural up and down of hunger and fullness. Again, though, there's a lot of advice which is contradictory about what works in terms of eating, from full range of telling you to fast for a few days completely or to eat 5 or 6 small meals a day. So there's an enormous range of advice. The reality is that different things work for different bodies, and we don't necessarily know what's going to work until we try some things. I wouldn't recommend periods of food fasting without some medical advice and some support, as they can have risks associated with them. Lots of people do find that their symptoms stabilize a bit when they're able to eat smaller amounts more often throughout the day. However, eating 5 or 6 meals a day can put more pressure on you to prepare food more often, to find healthy options where processed snacks might be easier, and to kind of be around in the kitchen or in the home or where the food is, which might not tie in with your work pattern. So sometimes it's going to be about thinking what's going to work with you and your routine, and it might be about trying small changes to when you eat, like maybe making a habit of having breakfast in the morning or taking a snack with you to work so that you can break your morning up. Again, we know that all bodies are very complicated and very different. So sometimes you might make a change and it may not work for you, and you might have to go back, or sometimes you can make a small change and then build on it if it is working. It's worth touching again on part of how we eat being whether eating is kind of a positive experience for you or a negative experience as well. It's more likely that you're going to get disruptions to your digestive system when you're under stress or when that fight or flight system is in adrenaline mode and you're anxious or you're under pressure. So if you're trying to eat quickly, if you're trying to eat in an environment where you're not feeling comfortable, if it's very loud or very bright, that might have an impact on how well you digest, or if you're with people that make you feel unsafe. In contrast, if you're able to eat somewhere where you feel relaxed, if you can change the environment so that you feel a bit more at ease, and if you're with people that you trust and that support you, that may make your mealtime a more positive experience, and that can certainly support your digestion and support your body in making it a less tiring endeavour. So that's, like I said, a brief overview of what kind of things we should be eating to support a healthy digestive system, to support energy levels and good sleep and all of those things. We'll end this session here, and then the next session is going to be about what barriers there are to eating well with fatigue and how we can try and overcome some of those. Thank you very much for listening.